Welcome to lesson number 8, the last one in our History of Arabs and Islam course. This week is dedicated to the cultural mosaic of the medieval Middle East. In the previous week, we understood the importance of religious identity for the inhabitants of the medieval Middle East, but we also learned that it wasn't the only determining factor. Today, we'll dedicate our attention to culture as another important layer of human identity. Our starting point is the closing statement of the previous lesson. Cultural identities were designed to separate, but also unify individuals and groups. We can observe different, complex, and sometimes opposing trends. There was an inclusive trend in the Middle East that offered a common meta-identity, but there was also marginalization of certain cultural traits. Parallel to cultural integration of small units into the bigger majority groups, also local and regional identities were created, and they defied integration. Our task for now is to understand the factors that formed and constructed a shared identity throughout the Middle East and the Muslim world. We'll do it by focusing on Arabic and Persian as languages that were very powerful cultural tools. We'll discuss the other cultural trends further on in our lesson this week. So, what was the shared meta-identity, and what were the processes that nourished it? We remember how vast the Middle East is. It was, and still is, the home of many different peoples, ethnicities, and languages. Yet, despite all these differentiating cultural traits, there was a common culture. The content of the shared culture was based on the Arabic language and on Islam. Yes, religion was a component in the shared cultural makeup. Arabic and Islam were intertwined. Arabic was the language of Islam and its texts. Religious texts throughout the Muslim world used Arabic. Scholars of Islam from Agra, India, wrote to their colleagues in Mecca, yes, in Arabic. But Arabic had two other functions, secular ones. Thus, Arabic was highly relevant, even mandatory, also for the non-Muslims and the non-Arabs in the Middle East. Arabic was the language of administration systems of the Muslim empires. Even after the rise of the Persian dynasties and the entry of Turkish peoples into the political elite of the Middle East, Arabic continued to serve as the language of the administration. For example, the Mamluks of Egypt, who came from Turkish and Caucasian origin, ran the Sultanate in Egypt in Syria in Arabic. Alongside its religious and administrative functions, Arabic was the language of science and intellectual exchanges as well. Scholars of medicine, astronomy, geography, algebra, etc., throughout the Muslim world, from Inner Asia to North Africa, could read the same scientific texts. Several mechanisms promoted shared worldviews and knowledge. The most important were travel, trade, and pilgrimage. Many people traversed the roads of the Muslim world for different aims. The mobility of people, animals, and materials facilitated meetings and acquaintances from places very far apart. People spoke, shared knowledge, texts, materials, and equipment. The outcome promoted unification based on similarities and consensus. The interaction with foreigners also gave rise to local pride. The encounter with strangers sharpened the awareness to the special local features of the region. Uniqueness allowed self-esteem and a sense of dignity, which in turn encouraged further development of diversity. Local pride was one of the reasons for the evolution of parallel local identities. Another reason was antagonism to the privileged status of Arabs and Arabic. The evidence from as early as the mid-8th century testifies to the formation of the Shu'ubiyya. This was a cultural and literary movement that challenged the superiority of Arabic and the Arabs. We've mentioned this cultural trend when we analyzed the human diversity of the Abbasid administration. The Abbasid administration included many non-Arabs who recently converted to Islam. These non-Arab converts encountered opposition from those who wanted to safeguard the hegemonic place of Arab culture within Islamic civilization. Others feared that the evolution of parallel identities, including the rise of local identification marks, may lead to the disintegration of the unified Muslim world. Thus, the different cultural trends that came into play encouraged the integration into the shared Arabic-Islamic civilization, but also allowed, in some cases, the development of important local identities. The local ones didn't replace the shared identity, but added to it. Marginalization, stratification, and geographical delimitation arranged the relationship between the different layers of identities. In order to see how this arrangement worked on the ground, we look next at the medieval Arab identity as a shared cultural space across the Middle East, as well as a marker of one specific cultural group within the Middle East.